The ink on the ledger was still wet when the 2 black cars pulled up outside the diner. Wynn had been there until 2 a.m. 6 nights out of 7 for the past 3 years, not because Sal paid overtime, which he didn't, but because the night shift cashier could barely count change and someone had to reconcile the till before morning. She was 26 years old and did the math in her head before the calculator finished loading. It wasn't a talent, it was survival. Numbers didn't lie the way people did. Numbers didn't disappear for 4 days and come back smelling like a different woman's cigarettes. Her stepfather had been doing exactly that since she was 12. She didn't think about Rodney unless she absolutely had to. Tonight absolutely had to arrived in the form of a man in a grey overcoat who walked through the front door at 2:13 in the morning and set a piece of paper on the counter in front of her without saying a word. Wynn looked at the paper, then she looked at him. He was maybe 40, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and hardened into something more severe over time. Slate-colored eyes, no expression. He wore his suit the way men wore body armor, like it wasn't clothing, it was protection. "You're Wynn Pace," he said, not a question. "You walked past 6 empty tables to find me," Wynn replied. "So you already know that." "Your stepfather, Rodney Pace, signed over a promissory note using your LLC as collateral, Pace Financial Consulting." He tapped the paper. "You own controlling interest." She felt the cold move from the diner's broken AC unit straight into the center of her chest. She'd set up that LLC 2 years ago to do freelance bookkeeping. She'd told Rodney about it exactly once, at Thanksgiving, when she was trying to explain why she couldn't lend him money. "How much?" she asked. $380,000. She set her pen down very carefully. The door opened again, a different man this time. Brooder, dark jacket, the kind of build that suggested he'd carried heavy things for a long time and hadn't minded it. He had a beard, tired eyes, and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow at a diagonal. He looked at the first man. Something passed between them. Not quite hostility, not quite camaraderie. Recognition, maybe, the kind 2 wolves shared when they found the same carcass. "Galt," the first man said. "Thies," the second man answered. They'd clearly existed in the same city for a long time, never together, but they knew the shape of each other. Galt looked at Wynn, then at the paper on the counter. "She's got mine too." Thies said nothing, which was answer enough. Galt reached into his jacket and produced a second document. He didn't set it down gently. He dropped it. The pages fanned out across the counter, and Wynn saw her name printed in the header. The LLC she'd created to legitimize her freelance work. The LLC she'd never thought to check had been used without her knowledge, twice, by the same man. Rodney had played both of them. Used her name as collateral with 2 separate organizations, then vanished. Left the state, probably. Left her behind like a coat he didn't need anymore. The total across both documents was close to $700,000. Wynn closed the ledger in front of her. "I don't have $700,000, she said. "I make $14 an hour, and I've been doing it for 3 years. "We know what you make," Thea said. "Then you understand why this conversation is pointless." Not pointless. He glanced around the diner. The cracked vinyl booths, the grease-filmed windows, the single flickering light above the pie case. "You're doing the books for this place off the clock, because you can't stop yourself from fixing things that are broken." Wynn said nothing. "Your stepfather signed your name. That makes you responsible for the debt under the terms of the agreement." He paused. "We don't enjoy this situation any more than you do. Galt and I have very different business interests. We've had very few reasons to be in the same room." "We have a reason now," Galt said. He'd pulled out the stool at the counter and was sitting on it like he owned it, arms folded, watching her the way you watched a math problem you weren't sure. "Had a solution, yours, you settle it. You walk, you run, we find you. You lie to us." "I don't lie," Wynn said. "I do books. Lying is bad accounting." Galt went quiet. He turned to look at Thies. Thies almost smiled. It didn't quite reach anything. "Come with us," he said. Wynn looked at the ledger on the counter, at the diner around her, at the life she'd built with the baling wire and duct tape of her own stubbornness. She took off her apron, folded it neatly, set it on the counter. "Who drives?" she asked. The estate was outside the city, not dramatically, not ostentatiously, simply a very large house behind a very high fence, staffed by men who moved quietly and made eye contact at the wrong times. Gault went back to his own operation that night. He and Theus shared the estate the way two businesses shared a building, different floors, different wings, occasionally crossing paths with the fixed courtesy of strangers. Wynn was put in a room in the east wing. It was larger than her apartment. The bed had 4 pillows, which felt offensive. She didn't sleep. At 6 in the morning she got up, found the kitchen, made coffee. She also found a stack of unopened mail on the corner of the kitchen table that someone had been ignoring for 3 weeks. She organized it by date because she couldn't not. Theus walked in at 6:20, already dressed. The man clearly did not sleep like a human. He stopped when he saw her, looked at the sorted mail. "The top 3 are overdue," Wynn said, pouring herself a second cup. "The 4th is a premium renewal on a policy I'd guess you don't actually need, based on what I can tell about your asset structure from a 30-second glance. The bottom 2 are junk, but you have them mixed in with your real correspondence, which means whoever sorts your mail isn't paying attention." Theus walked to the coffee maker, said nothing for a long moment. "You sorted my mail." I was bored. "You've been awake for less than 20 minutes. "I've been awake since 3, I sorted it twice." He looked at her with those slate eyes, doing what she did, running numbers, calculating value, deciding whether what stood in front of him was an asset or a liability. "I'll put you to work in the finance office," he said finally. "The secondary ledgers, legitimate holdings, real estate, import licensing." "What's the rate?" "Excuse me." "The rate, against the principal." Wynn set her cup down. "You want me to work off $700,000? Fine. What's the credit per hour? If you expect me to calculate my own debt reduction, I need the interest rate and the minimum to know whether I'm making progress or treading water." Theus looked at her for a long, quiet moment. $5,000 off the principal per week, based on performance. 10, Wynn said. "Based on actual output. I find something useful, I get credited for it. Flat rate is insulting to both of us. You'd be paying me the same whether I found a paperclip or a $500,000 discrepancy." The silence stretched. "Agreed," Theus said, and walked out of the kitchen. Wynn exhaled. Round 1. She spent her first week learning the shape of the empire. Theus ran clean, aggressively, obsessively clean. His legitimate businesses were layered in a way that would have made a tax lawyer weep with joy. Real estate trusts compounded into holding companies that fed into investment vehicles, so bland they were nearly invisible. He paid his taxes. Not all of them, not perfectly, but enough that a routine audit found nothing interesting. Gault's side was messier. Import logistics, mostly. She figured this out when he appeared in the finance office on the 4th day, dropped a cardboard box of physical manifests on the desk in front of her, and said, "Tell me what's wrong with these." Wynn looked at the box, then at him. "You want me to audit your shipping records. I want to know why my margins are off." He stood in front of the desk like he'd forgotten how to sit, arms folded, jaw set. He was the kind of man who was always slightly uncomfortable indoors. "These says you're good with numbers." "Theus said that." "He said you sorted his mail before sunrise." Wynn pulled the box toward her. It took 4 hours. The manifests were physical because Gault didn't trust digital records, which meant everything had to be cross-referenced by hand. Cargo weight, fuel receipts, customs declarations. By the time she found it, her eyes ached and she'd consumed 3 cups of coffee and 1 very sad granola bar from the bottom of her bag. "You have a vendor problem," she told Gault. She spread 3 manifests across the desk and pointed to a column of fuel receipts. "Your carrier on the Route 7 corridor, Linden Transit, is billing you for full loads, but the fuel receipts tell a different story. You're getting charged for 12 tons of payload, but the trucks are running light by 30 to 40%. Whatever's going into those containers, it's not what the manifest says." Gault stared at the paper. His expression went very still in the way that meant something dangerous was happening behind it. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Based on what you've given me, 8 months. She paused. "There's more." His eyes lifted to hers. "Linden Transit is also a vendor for at least 2 of Theus's import-licensed companies. I recognized the carrier code when I was working his ledgers earlier this week. Which means whoever is running this shell game isn't targeting just you. They're skimming off both of you, simultaneously, through the same routing number." The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the house settling. Gault pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call." They sat in the same room for the first time with Wynn, as something other than the subject of negotiation. She laid it out across Theus's conference table, the spreadsheets, the carrier logs, 3 pages of handwritten notes. The 2 men who nominally owned her debt sat on opposite sides of the table and read what she'd built. "Linden is a front," Theus said, "not a question. It clears about 60,000 a month from your combined logistics," Wynn confirmed. "Small enough not to trigger your routine reviews, large enough to matter over time. Whoever set it up understood your audit schedules." "Internal," Gault said flatly. "Someone inside had sold information about when and how they reviewed their own books." "Probably," Wynn said. "But it doesn't matter who told them if you shut down the routing first." She turned to the last page. "I've already drafted a freeze order for the carrier contract. It needs both authorization codes. Both operations are affected, so both of you have to sign off." Neither man spoke. Then Theus looked at Gault. Gault looked at Theus. One of those wordless exchanges that carried entire conversations. "You drafted the freeze order," Theus repeated. "While you were having your dramatic pause, yes." Gault made a short sound, not quite a laugh, but adjacent. Theus slid the freeze order toward himself, read it, and signed. Passed it to Gault. Gault signed without reading it, which told her he either trusted Theus's review or trusted her work. She wasn't sure which was stranger. "The man behind Linden," Theus said, setting his pen down. "His name is Pratt. He runs a freight brokerage in the Harbor District." He looked at Wynn. "He'll need to be confronted." "A confrontation." "A meeting," Gault corrected, then less carefully, "with consequences." She understood what they were asking before they finished. They wanted her there. Not as a hostage, not as furniture, as proof. The person who'd found the discrepancy, built the case, who could sit across from a man like Pratt and read out the numbers that condemned him while he sat there sweating through his collar. She thought about saying no. She thought about what saying no got her. "I'll need printed copies of the carrier logs," she said. "And I'm not going into a room where there are guns without someone telling me there are guns." "There will be guns," Gault said. "Then tell me where the exits are." The freight brokerage was a corrugated building off the Harbor District's least maintained pier. It smelled like salt and machine oil, and the specific exhaustion of a space that had been used for purposes it wasn't designed for. Pratt was already there, a lean, nervous man in a fleece vest who'd clearly hoped this meeting would involve someone's second in command, not Gault himself, and definitely not Theus, and absolutely not the woman with the leather folder who sat down at the table and opened it like she was conducting a performance review. "We identified the routing number discrepancy in March," Wynn began, keeping her voice even. "Or rather, your timing suggests you assumed we wouldn't. The Linden Transit Carrier Code appears in 43 freight invoices across 8 months. I've summarized them here." She slid the top sheet across. "The variance between declared cargo weight and fuel consumption indicates the actual payload averaged 33% below what was billed. The difference was routed through a shell entity registered in Nevada under the name Frontier Freight Holdings, which you incorporated personally in the same month. You became Linden's managing director." Pratt's face had gone grey. "I'd like to speak to," he started. "You're speaking to me," Wynn said. The total liability is approximately $480,000 over the full period, accounting for compounding. We've prepared a settlement offer. She slid a second sheet across. You sign over the Frontier Freight Holdings assets. Provide full disclosure of any additional entities you control that interface with either of these operations, and leave the harbor district permanently. Pratt looked at the paper. He looked at Thies, who was watching him the way a hawk watched a parking lot. He looked at Galt, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the particular stillness that preceded violence. And if I don't? Pratt asked. Galt shifted his weight. Then we move to the alternative, Wynn said, which I'd rather not summarize. Pratt picked up the pen, signed all 3 copies. He was halfway to the door when his second, a thick-necked man who'd been standing in the back corner the entire time, made a decision that was objectively stupid. He moved toward the table, toward the documents, hand already inside his jacket. What happened next was very fast. Galt moved first, but not fast enough. The man had the angle. Thies was on the wrong side of the room. Wynn grabbed the heavy steel stapler off the corner of the table and threw it. It was not an elegant throw. It was not a powerful throw. It clipped the man on the shoulder at exactly the wrong moment, which happened to be exactly the right moment. His arm jerked, the shot went wide, and Galt closed the distance in 2 strides and handled the rest in a way that Wynn declined to process in real time. The room went quiet. Pratt had already run. Thies looked at Wynn across the table. He was breathing differently than usual. Not from exertion. She got the feeling almost nothing exerted him physically, but from something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet. A stapler, he said. It was the heaviest thing in reach, she said. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to hide it. Galt turned around. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the guarded assessment from the kitchen. Not the blunt suspicion from the finance office. Something rawer than either. He crossed the room and checked her hands without asking permission, turning them palm up. She'd scraped one against the table's edge when she grabbed for the stapler. "You're bleeding," he said. "It's minor." He didn't let go of her hands. His voice when he spoke was stripped of its usual roughness. "You threw a stapler at an armed man. He was going to shoot you. You could have been killed." "So could you," Wynn said. "You're worth more to me alive. Both of you are." She paused. "I still have $400,000 of debt left to work off." Galt stared at her for a long, unreadable moment. Then he laughed. It came out of him like something breaking loose, rough and real and surprised at itself. Thies watched from across the room. His expression was the quietest she'd ever seen it. Not cold. Something more careful than cold. "The debt is forgiven," Thies said. Wynn turned to look at him. "Your stepfather's marker was paper. It bought your presence." He picked up his copy of the signed settlement, folded it with precise hands, and tucked it inside his jacket. "It did not buy this." "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," Galt said, still holding her hands, "that you don't work for us." "Then let me go." Neither man moved. The silence stretched long enough that she could hear the seagulls outside, and the slap of water against the pier, and the distant horn of a container ship coming into harbor. "We can't," Thies said. "You know too much." "Everyone says that. Everyone means it." Wynn looked at the two of them, Galt, rough-edged and reluctant in everything except the moments that counted. Thies, precise and sealed and slowly, carefully coming open at the seams. The world they lived in had tried to use her as a pawn, but she'd made herself a rook instead, and now they didn't know what to do with her in any configuration where she left. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I want the Linden sector." Galt's eyebrows rose. "Pratt's gone. The infrastructure is still there, the carrier routes, the port contacts, the logistics chain. Someone has to manage it clean, and you don't have someone who can." She straightened. 25% of net margin from that sector deposited into an account in my name. I clean up the books, build you a legitimate logistics arm that survives an audit, and you don't have to manage the harbor district on top of everything else." She looked at Theus directly. "Consider it severance for the debt." Theus was quiet for a long time. 30%. "And you'll handle the Route 7 contracts personally." "Done." Galt shook his head slowly. He looked almost bewildered. "She walked into a room with a man who tried to have her shot, and she's negotiating margin percentages." "The shooting was an unexpected variable," Wynn said. "The negotiation was always the plan." Winter came. The harbor froze along the shallows. Wynn's office, real now, a proper room with 4 monitors, and a whiteboard she'd already covered in routing maps, was warm enough. She'd stopped counting the days of her debt in November because there was no debt left to count. She stayed anyway. She told herself it was because the work was interesting. The logistics sector was a genuine puzzle, and puzzles had always made her feel more functional than anything else in her life. She told herself the alternative, going back to a $14 hourly rate, and a broken cash register and a life assembled from other people's leftovers, held less appeal than it once did. She didn't tell herself what it meant that Galt brought her coffee at 6 a.m. without asking how she took it, because he'd already memorized it, or that Theus had started knocking before he entered her office, which he hadn't done at the beginning, and which meant something she wasn't ready to quantify. Rodney appeared on a Tuesday in January. He'd heard, through the specific grapevine of desperate men, that his stepdaughter was alive and operational and apparently valued. He came to the front gate with a story about getting clean and a speech about family, and the gate guard called upstairs because he'd given Wynn's name. She took the call. She told the guard to bring him to the courtyard. She came downstairs alone. Rodney had aged badly, gaunt in the way of a man who'd spent 6 months outrunning consequences and losing. His coat was wrong for the weather, and his hands shook with a familiar tremor she'd watched her whole childhood. He looked up and saw her, the tailored blazer, the good boots, the small diamond in her ear that Galt had pressed into her hand after the harbor meeting without explanation and without meeting her eyes, and something moved across his face that wanted to be paternal. "Wynn," he said. "My God, you're—" "I know what I am," she said. "I made a mistake. I was desperate. I've been trying to find a way to fix it." "You used my name," she said, "twice, for 2 separate debts, and then you left." She watched his face, watched him search hers for the girl who used to pretend she wasn't awake when he came home at 3 a.m., the girl who'd silently absorbed every failure because she had nowhere else to go. "I'm not in debt anymore, Rodney. I own the paper." He blinked. "I own the carrier contracts, the routing infrastructure, and 30% of the net margin from the sector you accidentally leveraged my name to build." She tilted her head. "I turned it into equity. That's the difference between you and me. You see a number and you run. I see a number and I fix it." Behind her, she felt rather than heard them. Theus on her left, Galt on her right, having appeared with the particular soundlessness of men who'd trained themselves to be where they were needed. She hadn't called them down. They'd come anyway. Rodney saw them. The color left his face completely. "You have 30 seconds to get off this property," Wynn said. "The gate is behind you. The road goes north and south. I don't care which direction you choose." He looked at the men flanking her. He looked at his stepdaughter's face and whatever he found there. No anger, no grief, just the clean and final arithmetic of a woman who'd balanced her own books and closed the account, made him take a step back. Then another. He turned and walked through the gate without looking back. Wynn watched until he was gone. The gate closed with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Galt's hand settled on her shoulder, heavy and steady, the weight of a man who'd stopped pretending he wasn't watching out for her. Thies stood slightly closer than usual, which for him was the equivalent of an embrace. She didn't feel the cold. She'd spent her whole life doing other people's math, adding up their debts, reconciling their accounts, fixing their books before the morning shift came in. She'd been used as collateral by a man who thought she was a line item. She'd been underestimated by men who confused her silence with submission. But she understood something about numbers that most people never grasped. The value of an asset was never fixed. It was determined entirely by who controlled it. She walked back inside. The books on her desk were hers. The routing codes were hers. The 30% margin landing in her private account every month was hers. The two men who followed her through the door, complicated and damaged and fiercely, quietly hers in ways that had nothing to do with debt or paper, or the terrible accident of her stepfather's cowardice, were hers too, in the only way that mattered. She hadn't been sold into this life. She'd balanced her way into it, one ledger at a time.